sectional leader is Mrs. Christy Rivers. I know her very well. She serves as our third grade teacher at Bay Lutheran School in Plano, Texas.
We know her so well, she teaches fourth grade, she said.
Oh, she teaches fourth grade. Well,
You locked me up, remember? For good behavior.
she's, okay, she started as a third and fourth grade teacher, so that's fine. Yes, she does teach fourth grade now. Even while she is very gifted and also teaches Concordia University, Nebraska dual credit courses for us in our high school, and does a variety of other things. And as if you serve in a Lutheran school, you know that's the way it goes, right? You don't only wear one hat, and so it is also true for Mrs. Rivers. Also, her children are in, have had some of her children in my classes. Her husband is my elder, so we know the family very well, richly blessed. Please help me welcome Mrs. Christy Rivers.
I love this day. You haven't heard my presentation. I tried really hard to think of some kind of musical connection with the theme, and I have nothing. So forgive me if my singing voice is not much, and so I'm going to just ignore the theme. I am not a singer. I am more of a storyteller. So I'm going to start with a story. Storytelling actually is one of the classroom management techniques I use. They like stories, right? Any age. And it draws them in. So, imagine with me, once upon an August, you go into your classroom and you work really hard. You have cleaned, you have organized, you have strategized, you have decorated, you have a perfect Instagram-worthy classroom. Your library in your classroom is perfectly curated with a collection of classical works suitable for your grade level. Your walls are covered with beautifully framed artwork. The desks are in gloriously straight rows. You have assembled the very best curriculum and resources on every subject you teach, and your lessons are the stuff of dreams. You have a well-worn copy of Serpents in the Classroom and the double-nosed Latin behind your incredibly tiny desk, without a single paper in your inbox. You've read all the philosophy, you're well-versed in classical Lutheran education, even your pristine Ticonderoga pencils are sharpened to precise points. You are an excellent teacher. And then the little sinners show up. You know, this time of year, I am a fantastic teacher. Ask me again in a few months. Teaching is just, it's not a purely academic work. It's a part of a human relationship. The student-teacher relationship can be a very difficult one, and usually marred by sin. Sometimes they can be awful. Sometimes we can be awful, right? I have been a member of CCLE for a while now, and I've observed that we spend a lot of time at this conference rightly talking about why we teach and what we teach and how we teach, but it's not particularly fun to talk about what we need to do in order to be able to teach effectively. My hypothesis is that we don't particularly like talking about classroom management because it's a lot of law. I haven't had much fun writing this presentation because it reminds me of my failures as a teacher. We all screw up at some point. And who wants to talk about our shortcomings when we get together to celebrate the good, the true, and the beautiful? I also didn't print this, so good luck. So here I am, and talking about classroom management, maybe out of foolishness, maybe out of hubris, maybe a little both. But that's what we're going to do for this class period. And we'll try to save lots of time at the end so you can refute me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christy Rivers. That's the legal name that I sign to documents and anything that I write. My family and my church family call me Christy. You're welcome to call me Christy. My 3 teenagers call me Mom, of course, and I am Aunt Christy to 22 of the cutest children you have ever seen. 5 of them are here. I can prove it. But at Faith Lutheran School in Plano, Texas, I am Mrs. Rivers. So this is the person that I want to introduce you to today. Even though it's much more comfortable for me in a room of my peers to be Christy. You see, in the classroom, I am a specific version of myself that is reserved for that specific relationship, right? Even my own children, when they had me in my classroom, had me call me Mrs. Rivers, because that was the vocation that I was functioning within. So in your classroom, right, you are Mr., Miss, Mrs., whoever. Out of curiosity, how many of you teach like little bitties? Okay, bless you. You are the saints of the earth. How many of you teach elementary? Okay, middle school. Some of you are both, and many. Right? High school. Not a teacher, pastor, other cool guy sitting here, right? Awesome. Okay, just so I can kind of see who is my audience. Audience is important to us English teacher types. When I teach elementary school, Mrs. Rivers is different than when I teach high school, right? In elementary school, Mrs. Rivers loves dinosaurs and coffee. She loves presents of rocks. I get a lot of rocks. Mrs. Rivers loves rocks. Christy is not so thrilled. Rock. But Mrs. Rivers loves them. When I am Mrs. Rivers' high school teacher, I prefer dark chocolate, debating, and sarcasm. I came from a high school background and started teaching elementary school, and I found out really fast that sarcasm makes little kids cry. Sorry, please don't talk. Sorry, Pastor. His daughter was in that class. Oh, okay. Moving back to my presentation, back into Mrs. Rivers, that was Christy. I think that it sounds a little crazy to have this kind of multiple personality thing going on. But here's where they came from. Some of you know my husband, Matt. He presented with me last year. He came to our presentation. That one was a little more fun than this one. But he was a police officer for 10 years, right? And one of the things that they teach young police officers is that when you put on the uniform, you become officer whomever, right? And when you take off the uniform, you go back to being you, right? That you have to literally kind of transition back and forth as part of a healthy relationship with that profession. And we're not, as Lutherans, unfamiliar with this concept, right? There's pastors in the crowd. You put on your clerical, and they literally take that office upon themselves, right? Then they go home and they go back to being husband, dad, sons, brothers, neighbors. We understand that these vocations have to work simultaneously. And that's not to say that teacher, pastor, police officer, or anyway, the same vocation, just that there's this taking on and putting back off, right? There's this need for watchfulness in all these professions where you are in some way protecting and guiding and guarding, right? When I walk into my classroom, I'm Mrs. Rivers. I guard and I protect all that is good, beautiful, and true within my space, right? Within my classroom. And when I leave, I go back to the other vocations that God has placed me into. But teachers must be watchful. We have to constantly be paying attention to everything. We can't afford to miss anything. When the order of a classroom breaks down, when I am not rightly guarding hearts and minds, sometimes for themselves, it hurts the students, it hurts me as a teacher, it hurts the families, the school, and the church. classroom management is not a lot of fun to talk about because, I mean, I think it's probably a little bit more fun than talking about accreditation, but it forces us to confront our own shortcomings. There are days when we don't feel loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, good, kind, gentle, faithful, or self-controlled, and our students are the same. So, what do we do? I did what I always do and went and asked other people. I like having conversations about things that I am thinking about. And so I surveyed some teachers from various backgrounds, some of them former public school colleagues. I taught in a public school for a while. I have war stories. If you're interested later, some of them I don't want to talk about. But the most often heard advice and wisdom, can you guess? Don't smile till Christmas, right? That's really hard for me. I don't think I can get through a day, much less a whole semester, without being a little weird. It's just how things are. I was told as a young teacher that the only way to manage a classroom was by being a strict and stern disciplinarian. But that doesn't always work for me, right? I don't want my students to just fear me. I want them to also love and trust me, okay? And on the opposing end, I had a public school administrator who loved the phrase, build relationships, right? The older, catchier version is, they won't care how much you know till they know how much you care. You heard that along the way? Right? We do care about our students, but the idea of being a 10-year-old's buddy doesn't really sit well with me either. I don't want them to just love me. I also want them to fear and trust me. Right? Authority has to flow correctly. Now, if you happen to run out an emergency call at this point, don't take those 2 pieces of advice with you. Throw them down, stretch them out. Throw those away because I don't think they fit our role as a classical Lutheran teacher or homeschooling parent. We're not the unsmiling disciplinarians who give all law and no grace, and we're not everyone's buddy who's handing out cheap grace and lawlessness. Both ends of the spectrum are harmful, and we know that as Lutherans, right? We understand that distinction between law and gospel. We know the 3 uses of the law. We understand that our authority flows from the commandments, specifically number 4. So, I compiled a list of advice for what it's worth. Feel free to disagree, add to it, cross things out. If you don't write as fast as I talk, talking fast is also a fantastic classroom management strategy. Or talking very quietly. If you can't catch everything I say, there's my email address. Feel free to send me nice emails. If you have cranky email addresses, things to say, skeyser@fls. You can send him all of your complaints. Right, Pastor?
Yes.
Okay. So, for what it's worth, I think the analogy of being a watchman, right? The guardian of your classroom is a good one. Be a watchman, watch, set up borders and guard them from within and without. Stay awake, see everything, be constantly vigilant. That sounds great, right? Very noble. To guard our classroom from evil, to preserve order. But we gotta talk about what that means day to day because it's a lot of work. So, here's my list. Number 1, understand your authority. As a teacher, I feel strongly that my authority flows from the parent's authority, right? Pastor Keeter wrote a great paper on this a couple years ago. You go back to find it at CCLE. I have been called to watch and protect. Don't be afraid to use that authority that God is giving you. Number 2, read your handbook.
Amen, sister.
Those are very interesting documents. Sometimes a little weird, like who put that in the 70s, right? There are some things that you're like, what kid did what? And made that or parents, right? Or teacher. There's a code in our disciplinary system that's like struck with a violin or something. Have you seen that? Miss Rowney and I found that. We're like, somebody did something real weird. But read your handbook and know what it says, because that's what you're agreeing to uphold, right? That is what you are agreeing to hold your students to, the parents to yourself to, and read it to your students. They're not gonna read it on their own, right? Let them know what it says. Read it to your parents at back to school night. I like to highlight my favorite things, right? The things that are going to make our relationship work better, we can highlight them. When I discipline a kid, Pastor Peter taught me to cut and paste from the handbook and send it to the parent when explaining what happened. Right? And I had parents very shocked. This is the consequence? You sign the handbook and it says it right here. Right? Know your handbook and keep it. The nice thing about handbooks is they're so unemotional. They're nice and black and white. I'm not mad at you. I'm just wondering what the handbook says. Make sure everyone knows where those boundaries and those walls are. Number 3, watchful classroom management is not a game of gotcha. Okay? The point is not to find my students misbehaving and get up for it, to punish the little boogers, right? That's not the point. The point is to curb the old man and to guide the new man into loving the law, right? We want to win their hearts. We don't want to just beat them down. Where there is discipline, there is also forgiveness. And as much as possible, we want to anticipate those things before they happen and prevent them completely. Number 4, don't forget that the enemy is real. The devil and the world want to destroy us. Stand firm. It's not a game. Number 5, sound the alarm appropriately. Watchmen don't just stand there and look like, oh, that happened, cool, right? They have to get involved, right? Know when to get involved and when to sound the alarm. Communicate with parents. Make students communicate with their parents. Okay? My favorite way to deal with an egregious offense is to pull out my cell phone and say, are we calling mom or are we calling dad? And they get to pick. And then I put it on speakerphone and I make them explain how they broke the handbook. Because it's a lot more potent coming from them than from me. And then I explain what the punishment will be and how we will deal with it to forgive and all of that. Right? I make them tell mom and dad, I don't want to do it. Right? Make them communicate with their parents. Make them take responsibility for that, especially as they get older. But I've done that with 3rd and 4th graders. They can tell mom and dad what they did. And know when to seek help and guidance from your headmaster and other experienced teachers. Number 6, watch creatively. You should stick to your handbook. I'm not saying go AWOL here. But not every scaling of the wall requires boiling oil. Okay? Sometimes you have to think outside of the box and come up with creative solutions to problems or potential problems. Right? You're looking for places where you need to shore up the walls. You're looking for places where students could come up, because they're creative. Oh, they're so creative and they're mischief. They come up with new stuff every year. All right? Price for wisdom. Number 7, every watch is different. As soon as you find something that works really well, I've got this. I've got it all under control. They come up with something creative and it doesn't work at all anymore. Right? This was true for me for parenting. At the first kid, I was like, yes, I'm good at this. And then kid number 2 showed up and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Because kid number 2 was nothing like kid number 1. Kid number 3 threw me for a total loop. You know kid number 3, that makes a lot of sense. But no 2 kids are alike, which is wonderful and frustrating. And no 2 classes are alike. For example, I have collected work from students the same way for decades because I've been teaching longer than I thought I was. I keep thinking I'm a young teacher, and then I realize I have to take my name tag off and hold it up here to see what the schedule is. And if you have to do that, I hate to burst your bubble, we're not the young teachers anymore. But I had to rethink the way I collected work, because these smart little cherubs came up with ways to make it look like they had turned in their work, but they didn't. Right? And so then I had to rethink all of my procedures because they found a way through the wall, right, around them. And it wasn't good for them, right? I needed to go back and fortify it for their own good. Number 8. Be prepared. Think ahead. Have what you need. Don't be caught without oil in your lamps. A good lesson is an excellent classroom management strategy. Now, that said, a well-prepared lesson still goes off the rails as soon as the kids get involved. But knowing what you're going to do, right, having a good plan in place is an excellent strategy. You just need to pivot. You need to predict how your students are going to act, what they might do, how they're going to move, all of these things. And so basically, you know, you've got to be clairvoyant. But we try our best with that one. Number 9, be aware of space. Think about the flow of your classroom, right? How are students going to need to move through the room? What are they going to need to use, right? Are they going to all get clumped up over the pencil sharpener? Is everybody going to go into one specific area and want to play with the same doll and fight over it, right? Are they going to have a problem collecting papers or whatever? You need to think about the space and how the students will use it. And you need to teach the procedures that you want them to have. If your students move with them. Okay, even if they're high schoolers, stand out in the hall, follow them, pay attention to where they are. Kids aren't stupid, they're not going to do naughty things right in front of you most of the time. I'm sure they will. But they're going to wait till your back's turning, you're not paying attention. They're going to wait until you're sitting at your desk and ignoring them. You can't ever ignore them. Proximity is also a really glorious thing. There are so many things that you can prevent just by being in the right spot. There are so many times when somebody's not working and I just go over and I stand next to them. Pantomime is fantastic. Be stealthy. That's number 10, actually. Be stealthy. Use body language to address things without words. A look, a clap, clearing a throat, crossing your arms. There's so much you can do with just pantomime. And if you're quiet, they're watching My husband, as a police officer, would talk about command presence. Police walk a certain way, they hold their bodies a certain way. It commands authority. It lets you know that they are in charge. They have to do this. It's a survival technique, right? Teachers also need that as a survival technique. My first real teaching job was out in Maryland, just outside of DC, at a public school of 4,000 kids. And I taught the worst of the 12th graders. They were bigger than me, they were almost older than me. They were a little bit terrifying. And I had to be bigger and scarier than them, and convince them that they loved me and wanted to do exactly what I wanted them to do. Right? My husband calls that verbal judo. But you have to develop a presence as a teacher. You have to be able to carry yourself. You know, the old adage, kids smell fear, right? You have to let everyone know, just by your body language, that you are the authority in the room, and that you are there to watch and protect. Be aware of time. That's number 11. Number 11, be aware of time. Create a sense of urgency and importance. This was important for when I taught high school and kids would come to class on time. I would stand in the hall and I would hand them something as they walked in the door. You need to get this done, you need to get this done, you need to get this done, right? It would get them to class on time because they knew that I was going to start right on time and we were doing something really important and I was going to talk really fast because we only had so much time, right? And sometimes I'll tell my students things like, I only have 73 more days to tell you all the things that I know. You need to listen, right? You can create a sense of urgency, like everything in my head I have to get out to you. And that's probably where I taught them everything I know. But we remind them that this is important work, that this is their vocation as student, that we are doing real literature, we're reading first, primary sources, we're doing the real work of mathematicians. This is real vocational work, right? And it keeps them focused and on task when they know that what they're doing is not busy work. This is important work. Number 12. Be clear on expectations. Know what your expectations are first and foremost, and then clearly communicate those to students and insist upon them. This is the wall. We have to hold that boundary. For example, if the room needs to be quiet, we insist that the room needs to be quiet. We say things like, we are taking a test. In order to show love to our neighbor, we must remain quiet so they can take this test. And if they talk, I repeat exactly the same thing again. And I hold that boundary. And if they argue with me, my students will tell you, my daughter's not in here, but if she was here, she would tell you that I'll say, the only right answer right now is, yes, ma'am. There's no argument, it's just the truth. Number 13. It's kind of mixed those together, sorry. Number 13 is repeat things that are important. Repetition is an important classroom management tool. It's not just an important learning tool, it's an important classroom management tool. Students know exactly what to expect. In fact, some of them by the end of the year could stand up and be me. Because kind of a broken record. But they know exactly what the expectation is because it's repeated over and over and over again. Right? It's the reason they know the 10 Commandments. They know the meaning. Right? They know the law. It is written on their heart. So I repeat it over and over and over and over again. Number 14. Be calm. Yelling is really good for read-alouds. We actually had a tour one day, and they were in my room talking to me, And the 5th grade teacher next door was in a really good part of the story and yelled really loudly, and those parents whipped their head around. And I was like, it's read aloud time. Because, you know, yelling is great at certain points of the story. Quiet is better for discipline. For better or worse, I am the adult in the room. And my emotions cannot play into my disciplinary actions at all. Even though sometimes I get so mad. The one student who knew how to push my buttons better than anyone else was my own son. There were times when I'm like, you need to stand out in the hall while I call your father. But the truth is that it doesn't matter if I'm tired, if I'm hangry, if I'm annoyed, if I've told you 12 times already. I need to be calm. I need to be the calm authority. That doesn't mean I don't take a time out sometimes. Sometimes I say you need to step into the hall. I will speak to you in a moment. Right? And number 15, apologize, because you're gonna screw up. Repent, receive absolution if you have harmed your brother or sister in Christ, even if they're 4. Okay? It's really hard. But when you discipline a student incorrectly, or when you have set up a student for failure, however accidentally it is, you need to apologize to them. It's good modeling, and it's important for us as the body of Christ. So I'm sure there's better advice than that. And I know that I'm still on the short end of things because I want to have time for kind of a little bit of a roundtable. But that's my list. The one thing I will add to this is that constant vigilance is exhausting. Okay? If you are constantly watching, you are tired. And whenever students are in your care, you are constantly watching. Even if you are sitting at your desk, which I don't recommend, or you are working on another task, or you're still watching. But you put on that watchman persona, and then you take it off, right? You set it down again. A police officer can't be on alert 24/7. They would burn out. A lifeguard, right? When I was lifeguarded in college, you can't lifeguard all day, right? You can't drive all day. You can't watch constantly. You need rest, right? And so watchmen don't stand out all night. There's 3 watches in the night. They take one of them, right? You have to be able to do the same. You have to be vigilant when it is time to be vigilant, and then you have to set that aside and make sure that your vocations are well ordered so that you're not burning out, right? A well-ordered life includes both watchfulness and rest. So that would be my last piece of advice, is that when you are managing your classroom, be ultra vigilant, be watchful constantly, but then find those places of rest. And I know for me, my headmaster has helped me to be able to turn off the notifications from parents and ignore them after a certain time, right? That when I am at school, I am completely Mrs. Rivers. And when I am not, she's in the closet somewhere, right? Mrs. Viola Swamp. Don't you all want to do that? Every teacher's dream to get to come in as Mrs. Viola Swamp one day. All right, I'm gonna pause there and ask for comments, questions, jokes, limericks. Anyone else want to take my place? Yeah.
I have a question. Do you have any advice for when you just need to pivot back to a subject? You know, your students have asked a great, deep theological question, or have, you know, stuff happens, and you need to pivot it back.
I'm very obvious in my
Right.
transitions. I say, okay, I will get off topic and talk about this because this is a good question, this is an important question, I'm gonna talk about this. And now we need to go back to math, because again, I have 73 more days. And I
But
know-
do you set a timer? I mean, what do you do there? So that everybody knows
I have a
that it's
mental timer.
limited.
I think it's that I control the discussion. This is not an all of you discussion, this is I'm going to be the one who controls the conversation. I'm a benevolent dictator, but I'm still a dictator. I tell them sometimes, oh, you confuse this with a democracy. And I've let you speak, and now I'm taking it. I also tell them, I am the only funny person in this room. And if that's a problem, I won't be funny anymore. Right? Because they like to be funny too, and I'm like, no, sir, this is the boundaries, right? So I just control the conversation. I decide when the conversation is done, and I make that very clear. And now we need to go back to this. And they'll fuss a little, and they go, and give it a look, and then we're done fussing. Yes?
Can you tell me more about your handbook and having parents sign it? And can you give me a little bit broader idea of what that looks like in practice so that it is a good balance between law and gospel?
We take our handbooks to back to school meetings and give them to parents, and I go over highlights, any changes, anything that I think is particularly important. In fourth grade, we switch, I think in third, fourth grade, we switched to detentions and a whole different system. So I explain that to parents, like, this is what happens this year. If you have, 4 missing homework assignments, you go to homework detention. If you have this, and I work through all of those things that are maybe new to them, because you can't say I didn't tell you. When I was student teaching, I had my cooperating teacher told me every contact you have with a parent, you write it down, you document, you stick it in a file, and at the end of the year, you burn it. But until then, you keep it so that when the parent says, you didn't tell me that, actually, on August 13th at 7:34 p.m., and I do keep those things because people will come back and say, you didn't tell me. Okay, I understand that maybe you didn't remember this conversation, but it did happen. And so I try to be as upfront as possible. By the time you've been teaching for a few years, you've seen some stuff, and you're like, okay, my back to school letter is now 12 pages long. Adding that to my letter for next year. That thought crosses my mind several times a year. Well, that's going in the letter. But I think just letting them know as much as possible up front solves so many problems.
So I'm getting the sense that your behavior clause in your handbook is pretty specific, pretty detailed,
Yeah.
pretty clear on consequences. Okay.
Most schools that I have been at have been pretty strict about that, and so there's a lot of handbooks floating around that if yours needs more oomph, maybe borrow a couple and see what works best for your population.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
You've talked about the different personas that you have.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same for the kids.
Absolutely.
And in our school, we have a small school, everybody's a cousin. And is there a healthy way to make the kids aware of the fact, this isn't cousin dog pile time? We are accomplishing things
Absolutely.
here. Is there a healthy way to talk to them about, you're this way in the classroom and you're this way at home?
We can talk to them about vocation, absolutely.
Vocations.
I talk to my students about vocation all the time. This is your vocation to be a student. Lucky you, I wish I had this vocation when all I got to do was read books and learn stuff all day. Like, how much does that sound like fun to be in fourth grade again? To just have like spelling sentences is the hardest part of your life. But I talk to them about vocation. You are a cousin, you are brother, you are a son, you are a child of God, you are a student. Right now, you're a student. Yeah.
Could you go through maybe any early in the year routines that you established in helping to get the discipline for your class?
Everything, I think through everything a little too much. I'm an overthinker. But everything from like classroom jobs, what I want students to take responsibility for, what I don't want them to have responsibility for. And I thought about listing all of these sorts of things that I set up, but it's so different for grade and persona and class that it changes constantly. But things like when I walk in lines with my students, I'm the caboose. They're in front of me, and I can see everything they're doing. If I walk in the front, I have no idea what they're doing back there. Now, this doesn't work for preschool, right? Preschoolers are just like, okay.
Amen.
You can't even sit there if they're behind you. You can't be there if you're holding their hand. But fourth graders know exactly where to be, right? So I'm in the end of the line, and I see them, and I go, and they get back in line. But now, I'm not that scary, right? The worst that's gonna happen is you're gonna have a couple sentences where you're gonna have to write the fourth commandment again. But they understand that I'm watchful. I see everything. And I know what they're doing. I hear everything. And part of that is I have spies. There's children in the school. But they really, those sorts of routines where they know that I'm watching, they know that, and then know I'm not out to get them. Right? I'm there to protect them. I'm there so they can do their vocation properly. Yes.
Two things, just commenting on, their vocation. I acknowledge to my kids or my students that your vocation can be hard.
Yes.
So you need to, it's okay.
My vocation's hard some days. I don't
Right.
want to go.
Vocation is hard. But my question revolves around, so I'm tutoring this year once a week, 4th to 6th grade, English. And this is actually a co-op where the parents are supposed to sit with their child in class. And they are
That makes a whole difficult dynamic. Okay.
right. And so they are supposed to police their own child. They're supposed to,
But they don't.
but they don't. And
Yeah.
and so I'm thinking ahead for some strategies. And so you probably don't face this dynamic, but it's a real classroom
Yeah.
dynamic. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna
Absolutely.
think about this ahead of time because
Can you have a meeting with the parents before?
there's an orientation.
Okay. I would make my expectations really clear that this is how students are to behave, and it's your job to make sure that they're working this
Like a
way.
handbook, a handbook for,
Yeah.
for homeschool parents.
Yeah.
Because the other side of the coin is these kids are only in class one day a week.
Right.
And so, like, the classroom reality for them is much, like, you can tell the kids who transition from a school to a homeschool and come to this because they're like, okay,
Yes.
I'm ready. And everyone else is like, nah.
Yeah, there's always, we get kids who have never been in a classroom before who come in 3rd or 4th grade, and I'm like, honey, I would love to have a one-on-one conversation with you all day, but unfortunately, we have to do this as a group. So I have those conversations with homeschool kids sometimes, and, but I think that setting up those expectations from the beginning with the parents is really important, because otherwise you're just gonna be frustrated the whole time. And I think you set it up as the way that your child can get the most out of this is this, right? Because they want their kids to get something from this. And even ask them, like, what are your expectations for getting, and the way that I can teach your child the most that I can teach you, I'm thinking the best experience is if you help me, you support this sort of behavior, right? Because really, you're doing it for the child, you're doing it for their benefit, so you want the parents to be on your team. But, yeah, there's a lot of times when we're having a school event and I'm like, why aren't you disciplining? I'm like, fine, Mrs. Rivers is coming out. No, Mrs. Rivers comes out in that building.
So my question is, well, first of all, I love that you have a child communicate their misbehavior to the parents.
Parents don't believe me anymore. They don't believe me. So I made the two kids tell them.
Well, that's an issue. But further, it just builds that responsibility in the child. I did this, now I have to do this, which is bad, you know, so I think that's a really great idea. My question actually is, do you have good tips for dealing with very emotional parents? Or parents who do not believe that their child did this?
Well, I have the students do it because it actually diffuses the parents. When I've done this before, you know, they call it, the parent is emotional with the child and not with me. And then I've had parents come back to me later and say, well, I think you were too hard on my child with this incident. I said, do you remember the phone call? Do you remember what your child said that they did? Yeah. I had to have these consequences because of your child's choices. I've forgiven your child. I'm not mad at your child. It's over. And that's one of the things that I add to the conversation is, and now this is done, and we will never speak of it again. I tell the kids that too. We are done with this. And if I hear anyone speaking of this on the playground, then we've brought up a new sin, and we'll address that one. But this one's gone. Because I don't want to deal with it anymore. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for when you have certain kids who are better friends with each other or don't want to include other people in their group, not necessarily in a mean way, but just we have our thing, but then consequently others get sad, like how do you handle that sort of?
The only two rules that I ever post in my classroom, that I ever tell my students that I have, is love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, those are my two rules. You can't argue with them. You got a problem with them, take it upstairs. Right? Like, I didn't make them up. But when that happens, I'll pull students inside and say, are you really showing love to your neighbor? How would you feel if you were their spot? Right? I know this is your thing and it's great, and you can have your thing. But don't you think if they had a thing and you didn't, it would hurt you? So I go with are you loving your neighbor as much as yourself? And the answer is usually no. I mean, quite frankly, none of us are doing that very well ever. So that's the approach that I take. I mean, if it's mean, then we have to go with discipline. But if it's just an exclusion, it might, you know, they just need to see it in that way, I think.
What do you do when you have either implemented a consequence or a system that you've realized isn't working or is too harsh, and how to backpedal from that without losing authority?
I don't think that there's any loss of authority in mercy. I just, I could punish you to the full extent of the law, but I'm choosing not to. I don't think that there's any loss of authority there. I mean, mercy's cool. And in 4th grade, we spent a lot of time talking about the difference between justice and mercy. We read Arabian Nights, and we talk about this distinction. And I say, you deserve justice, I will give you mercy. So, yes, ma'am.
I also teach in 4th grade, and
That's
4th
right.
graders are very creative about finding ways to not turn in work. But when you turn in work, like, can you talk more about like the things that you have time to work around that or work through that in your classroom?
So usually I have this like stacking system, and they just go put it in there. I had kids putting their names on paper, like blank papers, just sticking them in there, and or like having all kinds of crazy ways to make it look like their paper was in there that wasn't in there. Like, it's less effort to just do the work. Like, who has the energy for that? 4th graders. And more than anyone, my son. But the way that I had to go around it is they had to bring it directly to me in the morning and have it checked off. And when you checked all your work off, then you got to go put your name tag back up for jobs. And if all your work was in first thing in the morning, you got a better choice of jobs.
Oh.
Nobody wants to clean the tables in the cafeteria, but if your homework's not done, guess what you're doing? You're cleaning the tables in the cafeteria. And then you're finishing your homework. So going to recess. Right? So, I mean, it's just how it is. Oh. Your work's here late. Bummer. Enjoy that table duty. Yes.
You had mentioned before, one of your presentations, like the sport communities. Do you have any other good ones? Consequences that are effective?
I think that the consequence has to fit the crime. My mom is a genius at this. And so it depends what the student has done. If the problem is disrespect or breach of authority, we go straight to the fourth grade, right? I had a couple of students this year who thought they were quite clever and picked up some new vocabulary of the 4-letter variety and decided to share that with the first graders. So, since they were so eager to pick up new words, I gave them a list of words to define. And then the second time it happened, the list was 4 times as long. One kid ended up defining like 700 words last year. And I just stuck it to him. And there were lots of discussions with home and all of that. But I try to make my punishments as creative as their iniquities. But still within the handbook. I mean, those are for like smaller infractions, but then there's also like when they broke the handbook vocabulary clause, there was also the detentions and such that were with that. But my special addition was that you got to learn more words. Right? Mrs. Rivers has lots of special little tasks that you can earn. None of them are pleasant. Yeah.
Where does losing recess fall in that spectrum? Because
A
in
lot.
my opinion, it's like
A lot of times,
punishment.
losing recess is not the punishment, it's running. So instead of losing your recess, you are going to run until you don't feel naughty anymore. That was one I learned from my son. Because if he sat still for recess, I'm only punishing myself.
Yeah.
So I will say, go run. I had a little boy once who ran for 23 of the 25 minutes of recess. Because every time he'd come back, he would, can I stop? Do you still feel naughty? He was honest. And so finally he comes back and he's like, I'm tired. I don't feel naughty anymore. And I was like, cool, go play. So sometimes if a student is really refusing to do work, I will make them work during recess, but that's kind of a special case rather than a rule. I know different teachers feel differently about that, but I want them to go run, especially the little boys. Yeah. People will tell you that everybody's the same, boys and girls are different, and boys need to go run or they make havoc. Yes.
When or do you refer a student to pastoral counseling and confession and absolution?
When there's something that is really egregious, and it kind of like I need support, that's when we go beyond it. Usually, confession and absolution happens with me, but if it were something truly egregious beyond the normal 4th grade or high school naughtiness, then I would bring in pastors, because headmaster is pastor. So I have sent people to pastor to do that. Generally, we do work through confession and absolution. I tell them, use the word repent. You need to repent. And they need to confess your sin so that I can absolve you. Sometimes I tell them, when I think they did something, pretty sure, not 100% sure, I tell them, you need to confess your sins. I'll tell them straight out. And they'll be like, I did this. And I'm like, great, now I can forgive you. Okay?
Go and sin no more.
Right. I did. Okay, one last story, and then I probably need to stop. I had this little boy, and he was in kindergarten at the time. He was in my 4th grade class this year. And he came up and he's at recess, and his head is hung low, and he said, Mrs. Rivers, I need to repent. And I said, okay, what did you do? I said a bad word in my head. And I was like, oh, go and sin no more. But he was just devastated that he got mad and he said the bad word in his head. So they do have sweet little practices. And they are our brothers and sisters in Christ. So, thank you for coming.